I had no idea that a simple load of laundry would unravel my entire life. It was a Tuesday, just another ordinary day. The kids were at school, the house was quiet, and I was going through my usual routine. My husband's work clothes were piled up in the laundry room, waiting for a wash. I reached into the pockets of his jeans, like I always did, fishing out loose change, receipts, and the occasional forgotten candy wrapper. But today, there was something else. A folded piece of paper, slightly crumpled, tucked away as if it were a secret waiting to be uncovered. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. I simply unfolded it, expecting another grocery list or a scribbled reminder. Instead, my eyes traced words that made my stomach lurch. I'm waiting for our meeting again. That night was unforgettable. I miss you. The world around me froze. My ears rang with a silence so loud it was deafening. I read it again. And again. Each time, the words carved themselves deeper into my skin like invisible knives. My fingers clenched around the paper, wrinkling it, twisting it, until it felt like it might crumble under the weight of my fury. He was cheating. I should have expected it. The late nights, the unexplained business trips, the distant looks, the way his phone had become an extension of his body. But I had ignored the signs, convinced myself they meant nothing. Because that's what love does to you, it blinds you with hope. But I wasn't blind anymore. I stood there, note in hand, my mind racing through a million scenarios. I could confront him. I could scream, cry, throw things, demand answers. But what good would that do? Men like him always have excuses. They twist the truth, paint you as paranoid, gaslight you into believing you're overreacting. No, I wasn't going to give him that chance. Instead, I took a deep breath and smoothed the note out. I placed it back exactly where I had found it, folding it neatly, returning it to his pocket like a secret I had never discovered. And then I smiled. If he thought he could play me for a fool, he had no idea who he was dealing with. Revenge was coming. And it was going to be cruel. For the rest of the day, I played my role perfectly. I made dinner like always, setting his plate down in front of him with a sweet smile. I listened to him talk about his exhausting day at work, nodding in all the right places. I kissed him goodnight and curled up beside him in bed, pretending my world hadn't just shattered. But inside, I was burning. I spent hours lying awake, staring at the ceiling, the note seared into my memory. Every word of it echoed in my head, fueling the storm inside me. That night was unforgettable. What night? Where? With whom? How long had this been going on? I had no answers. But soon, I would. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I made my move. His phone was locked, but that wasn't a problem. I had seen his passcode enough times to memorize it. 0826, our wedding anniversary. The irony nearly made me laugh. With practiced ease, I scrolled through his messages. And there she was. Her name was saved as C, nothing else. But her messages told me everything I needed to know. I can still feel you on me. Next time, let's get a whole weekend together. She doesn't suspect anything, does she? No, darling. She didn't suspect. Not until now. I took screenshots of everything, sending them to myself before deleting the evidence. I scrolled up, reading through their conversations, piecing together their timeline. It had been months. Maybe even longer. He had been buying her gifts, taking her on trips, lavishing her with the attention I hadn't received in years. It was disgusting. But also, it was useful. Because now, I had everything I needed to destroy him. I knew better than to let my emotions dictate my actions. Revenge had to be calculated, precise. If I exploded now, it would be over too quickly. He would find a way to spin this, make excuses, shift blame. No, I wanted him to suffer. And I already had the perfect plan. I was going to let him dig his own grave. That evening, I kissed him as he left for another late shift. I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the street, knowing exactly where he was going. To her. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. It was time to get everything in motion. The next few days were a performance, and I was the star of the show. I played the doting wife, the trusting partner. I laughed at his jokes, made his favorite meals, and even massaged his shoulders when he came home exhausted from work. Meanwhile, I was preparing for his ruin. The lawyer I had contacted was a shark. I explained everything, the note, the texts, the money he had spent on his mistress. Every transaction, every suspicious expense. I wanted to know exactly where he stood financially, what I was entitled to, and how I could leave him with nothing. And then came the fun part. I started dropping hints. Little things, subtle things, just enough to make him nervous. One evening, as he scrolled through his phone at the dinner table, I casually said, "You know, it's funny. I had a dream last night that you were hiding something from me." His whole body tensed. "What do you mean?" I shrugged, taking a slow sip of my wine. "I don't know. It was weird. Like, I found a note or something. But of course, that's silly." I smiled sweetly. "You'd never do anything like that, right?" His laugh was forced, his eyes darting away. "Of course not." "Good. Let the paranoia begin." A few nights later, I went a step further. As we lay in bed, I traced circles on his chest and whispered, "Do you think people are always faithful? I mean, really faithful?" He stiffened. What kind of question is that?" I sighed, playing innocent. "I don't know. Just something I was thinking about. I read this article today about a guy who cheated on his wife for years before she found out. Can you imagine?" I turned to face him, searching his face. "How do people even live with themselves?" He swallowed hard. "Some people are just selfish, I guess." "Yes, they are. But the real game began when I planted the seed of doubt. One evening, as he came home, I looked up from my laptop and casually said, "Hey, did you know Apple now sends a notification if someone screenshots messages?" His face drained of color. He fumbled with his bag, forcing a laugh. What? "No, that's not true." I shrugged. "I read it online." "Crazy, right? Imagine all the people out there getting caught." He didn't say a word. Perfect. By now, I knew his routine by heart. Every Tuesday and Friday, he told me he had a late shift. And every Tuesday and Friday, he went to her. So I did what any loving wife would do. I packed him a special lunch. Inside, I slipped a neatly folded note, the same size and shape as the one I had found in his pocket. But mine was different. "I know everything. Sleep well." And then, I waited. The moment he found the note, I knew. I had been sitting on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone when he came home that night. His face was pale, his hands stiff as he set down his bag. He didn't look at me. Didn't greet me. Good. I kept my expression neutral, fighting the urge to smirk. Let him stew. Let the paranoia eat him alive. "Hey, babe," I said, glancing up at him. "You okay? You look off." He forced a laugh. "Yeah. Just tired." I tilted my head. "Rough day at work?" For a second, I thought he was going to confess. His lips parted, his eyes searching mine, looking for a clue, anything that would tell him if I knew. But then, like the coward he was, he shook his head. "Yeah, just busy." Liar. I stretched, yawning. "I'll head to bed." "You coming?" He hesitated. In a bit." "Oh, I bet." He was going to spend the next hour tearing through his phone, checking for signs that he had been caught. Let him. The next few days, I tightened the noose. I started casually dropping comments, just little things that would gnaw at him. While folding laundry, you ever hear of those people who think they're getting away with something, but their spouse knows everything? At dinner, did you see that story about the guy whose wife found out he was cheating? She played along for months, just to ruin him at the right moment. Wild, right? His responses were short. His hands twitched. He barely touched his food. He was crumbling. And then, I set the real trap. One night, as he showered, I took his phone. His passcode was still the same, our wedding date. The irony would never stop being hilarious. I went to her messages. Then, I sent her a single text. She knows. And I deleted it. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it and went to bed. I didn't have to wait long. Barely an hour later, I heard his phone buzzing non-stop. She was panicking. Calling. Texting. Over and over. I turned away from him, biting my lip to keep from laughing. Because this was just the beginning. He barely slept that night. I could feel him tossing and turning beside me, the glow of his phone screen flashing in the dark as he frantically checked and rechecked his messages. He was unraveling. By morning, dark circles sat under his eyes. His coffee went untouched. He barely spoke. I pretended not to notice, humming softly as I flipped pancakes for the kids. Not hungry? I asked sweetly, sliding a plate in front of him. He jumped at my voice. Huh? Oh. No. Not really. I nodded, wiping my hands on a dish towel. Weird. You always eat breakfast. He gulped, shoving a hand through his hair. Yeah. Just, got a lot on my mind. I bet you do. The real fun started later that afternoon. I waited until he left for work, another late shift, of course, before taking my plan to the next level. I logged into our shared bank account. There it was. Transaction after transaction, hotel bookings, expensive dinners, lingerie purchases that were definitely not for me. My stomach twisted, but I swallowed the pain down. I had no room for heartbreak anymore. Only revenge. I transferred half of the money into my own private account, the one he didn't know about. Then, I called my lawyer. I have proof now, I said. He chuckled. Then it's time to move forward. And just like that, the wheels were in motion. But I wasn't done. That evening, while he was with her, I sent a little message of my own. A group text, to him and her. Me, hope you two had fun tonight. Can't wait to see you both soon. And then, I blocked both their numbers. By the time he got home, I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. But I heard him. The way he slammed the front door. The way he muttered curses under his breath. The way he stormed into the bathroom and turned on the faucet full blast, probably to muffle the sound of his panicked breathing. I smiled against my pillow. Tomorrow, he'd wake up to the real disaster. Tomorrow, his life would fall apart. By morning, the first cracks had turned into full-blown fractures. I watched from the kitchen as he paced the living room, his phone gripped tightly in his hand. His jaw was clenched, his knuckles white. He was trying to call her. Too bad I had already blocked her number from his phone while he slept. After a few failed attempts, he threw his phone onto the couch and ran a hand through his hair. Everything okay? I asked, setting a fresh cup of coffee on the table. His head snapped up. For a second, I thought he was going to explode, scream, demand answers, confess. But no. He still thought he had control. Yeah, he muttered. Just work stuff. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching him. You seem stressed. He forced a smile. Just tired. Not for long. Because today was the day his world collapsed. The first hit came at noon. I had already packed the kids' overnight bags and dropped them off at my mother's, making sure they were nowhere near the explosion that was about to happen. Then, I made my way to his office. His boss was a no-nonsense type of man, the kind who didn't tolerate scandals. And thanks to the proof I had gathered, the credit card statements, the hotel bookings, the texts I had printed out, I had enough to expose my husband's affair with a woman from his own company. A married woman, no less. I walked into the building with confidence, my envelope of evidence in hand. "Hi," I said sweetly to the receptionist. "I need to speak with Mr. Anderson. It's about a sensitive matter involving one of his employees." 30 minutes later, I walked out, leaving a storm brewing in my wake. But I wasn't done. The second hit came an hour later. While he was still at work, his bank account was frozen. I had already spoken to my lawyer, and with the financial evidence I provided, we were able to initiate a separation of assets. The joint account was split, with my half securely transferred into my personal account. Which meant that the next time he tried to book a hotel room for his mistress, his card would decline. The third and final hit? I sent her husband everything. Every text. Every receipt. Every photo. And then, I sat back and waited for the fireworks to begin. And oh, they did. By the time he got home, he was shaking. His tie was loosened, his shirt slightly unbuttoned, his face pale as a ghost. He looked like a man who had just been through war. "Good. Rough day?" I asked, casually sipping my wine. He didn't answer. Just stood there, staring at me, his breathing uneven. I leaned back in my chair. "Something wrong?" He swallowed hard. Did you do something?" I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" His nostrils flared. "My boss, he called me into his office today. Said someone anonymously reported my unprofessional conduct." I sipped my wine again. "That's unfortunate." His fists clenched. "And then my bank card stopped working. And then," his voice cracked. "And then Chris found out." Ah. Chris. The husband of his mistress. Poor guy. He had been so grateful when I sent him everything. I imagined my husband's little girlfriend was having an even worse day than he was. I tilted my head, feigning concern. "Wow. Sounds like you're having a really bad day." His eyes blazed. "You did this." I set my glass down and met his gaze head-on. Cold. Unblinking. "I told you," I said softly. "I know everything." He inhaled sharply, taking a step forward. But before he could say another word, I pulled the divorce papers from behind me and slid them across the table. His face drained of color. "Sign them," I said, my voice like steel. "Or we can keep playing. Your choice." He stared at the papers, his hands trembling. You don't have to do this. We can fix this." I laughed. "You think I want to fix this?" I leaned forward. "You destroyed everything. So now? I'm just returning the favor." He looked like he was about to argue, but then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and went even paler. It was his boss. And from the way his fingers trembled when he picked it up, I knew exactly what was coming next. He was about to lose his job. I picked up my wine glass, swirling the liquid slowly. I didn't even need to listen to the conversation, because I had already won. Checkmate. I sat back, watching him. His phone was pressed against his ear, but he wasn't speaking. He was just listening. And from the way his entire body stiffened, I knew exactly what he was hearing. Termination. His company had a zero-tolerance policy for office affairs, especially when they involved married employees using corporate trips as their personal playground. "Wait," he stammered, gripping the edge of the table. "I can explain." A pause. His eyes darted to me, wide and desperate, as if I was supposed to save him. I took another sip of my wine and smiled. He ran a hand through his hair, his breath coming in shallow pants. Please, Click. Call ended. His hands slowly lowered, the phone slipping from his fingers onto the table with a dull thud. And then, he did something I had never seen before. He cried. Right there, in front of me. Not just a tear. Not just a sniffle. He sobbed. Pathetic, broken, small. I let him sit in it. Let him choke on the consequences of his own betrayal. After a long moment, he lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw trembling. You ruined me. I arched a brow. No. You ruined you. His nostrils flared, and for a second, I wondered if he would snap. If he would shout, throw something, rage like a cornered animal. But then, his shoulders slumped. Like the fight had drained from him completely. I pushed the divorce papers toward him again. Sign. He wiped a hand over his face, shaking his head. You don't have to do this. I tilted my head. Do you think you deserve a second chance? He hesitated. Then, quietly, yes. I laughed. You don't get a second chance, I whispered. Not after what you did. Not after the lies, the cheating, the money you spent on her. My voice turned to ice. Not after you made me feel like I was crazy when all along, I was right. He swallowed hard. I wasn't thinking. I slammed my palm against the table, making him jump. Sign. The papers. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. His breath was shaky, his fingers weak. But he signed. Every single page. With each stroke of ink, I felt lighter. Stronger. Free. When he was done, he set the pen down and looked at me. What now? He asked, voice hollow. I picked up the papers, flipping through them. Then, I met his gaze and smiled. Now? You pack your things. And you get the hell out of my house. His mouth parted. Tea tonight? I leaned in, my voice soft, deadly. Right. Now. He didn't move at first. Just sat there, staring at me like a man who had just lost everything. Which, of course, he had. My stuff, he finally muttered. I smiled sweetly. Already packed. It's in the garage. His head jerked up. What? I stood, stretching lazily before walking over to the front door. Oh, you didn't think I'd let you lounge around here after everything, did you? I pulled open the door. The night air rushed in, crisp and final. Out. He hesitated. So I tilted my head, lowering my voice. Dangerously soft. Unless you'd like me to call Chris and let him know exactly where to find you? His whole body stiffened. Ah. There it was. The fear. The reality of what he had done finally slamming into him. Because Chris, the husband of his mistress, had not taken the news well. And from the rage-filled messages I had seen before blocking him, my soon-to-be ex was lucky he hadn't already been hunted down. With a final defeated sigh, he pushed up from the chair. His shoulders slumped, his face hollow. He walked past me, silent, broken. He stopped just before stepping outside. I knew what he wanted. Some kind of last word. Some pathetic, weak attempt at closure. I gave him nothing. Just an empty stare. And finally, with no choice left, he stepped out into the night. I shut the door in his face. Locked it. And just like that, he was gone. I pressed my back against the door, exhaling slowly. For a moment, I just stood there, letting it all sink in. The freedom. The justice. The revenge. Then, I smiled. Because I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Throwing him out was satisfying, but I wasn't finished yet. No, I wanted to make sure that when he looked back at this moment, at the wreckage of his life, he would remember exactly who put him there. Me. Because I was about to deliver the final, crushing blow. I waited 2 days. Let him stew in his humiliation. Let him scramble for a place to stay, let him feel the weight of losing everything. Then, I made my move. That evening, while sipping a glass of wine and watching a movie, I picked up my phone and unblocked him. Immediately, the messages flooded in. Him, please, just talk to me. Him, you don't have to do this. Him, I made a mistake. We can fix this. Him, I have nowhere to go. Please. Pathetic. I let him sweat for a few more minutes before finally responding. Me, check your email. And then, I blocked him again. In his inbox, he would find one last gift from me. A collection of screenshots from his text messages with her, along with all the financial proof of his affair. I had blind copied his entire family. His parents. His siblings. His cousins. Even his dear old aunt, who still thought he was a sweet boy, who could never do any wrong. I wanted everyone to know exactly who he really was. And just to twist the knife a little deeper, I tagged him in a Facebook post. A simple, elegant message for the world to see. Wishing my soon-to-be ex-husband and his mistress the best of luck. Since they enjoyed spending so much of our money together, I'm sure they'll be very happy in their new life. No hard feelings. Red heart. Then, I attached the hotel receipts. And hit post. I put my phone on silent after that. Because I didn't need to hear his incoming calls or the panicked messages from his family. I didn't need to see the public fallout unfolding in real time. I just curled up on my couch, poured myself another glass of wine, and smiled. Because I knew that somewhere out there, he was screaming. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter. Lighter than I had in years. No more secrets. No more lies. No more pretending to be the clueless, doting wife while he ran around behind my back. By the time I checked my phone, my post had already gone viral. Over 300 comments. Dozens of shares. His family members freaking out in the replies. His mother, mortified. His sister, absolutely ripping him apart. And the best part? His mistress had dumped him. Oh yes. That little detail had reached me through the grapevine almost immediately. Apparently, she hadn't appreciated being dragged into public disgrace. Her husband, Chris, had left her, taken their kids, and was gearing up for a vicious divorce battle. So now my dear, sweet husband had lost. White heavy checkmark his job. White heavy checkmark his money. White heavy checkmark his family's respect. White heavy checkmark his side chick. White heavy checkmark and his home. I had burned his entire life to the ground. And it was glorious. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I knew exactly who it was. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a message popped up. Him, I get it. I deserve this. But please, stop. I have nothing left. I stared at my screen for a long moment. Then, I laughed. Because he still didn't get it. This wasn't about taking everything away from him. It was about making sure he would never, ever forget what he had done. He had underestimated me. Thought I would cry, beg, crumble. Instead, I had destroyed him. And now I was free. So, I deleted the message. Blocked him for good. And then, with a smile, I stepped outside into the bright, beautiful world that was finally mine again. The end.